Hey, everybody. I hope y'all are doing well. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Joel LaViolette, and I'm a musician and composer based in Austin, Texas. I'm a Cubase user as well as Ableton and Pro Tools and all the others, but I'm a member of the Facebook group, the Cubase Users Group. And someone asked a great question yesterday. Uh, he was talking about mixing, and he asked whether he should render down his MIDI instrument tracks to audio before mixing. And there were lots of responses, which is good, and lots of sort of different information. And I mentioned that there can be issues if you are mixing projects, keeping the instruments as MIDI, because the MIDI is a real-time situation where you have, a MIDI note is triggering something. It's triggering a synth or samples. And depending on how your instruments are set up, whether those synths are triggering um, uh, oscillators that, whether they're re-triggering the oscillation, or for example, if you're doing round robin sample triggering, that can all uh, come into play when you're trying to mix something and keeping the instruments as MIDI. So there's a lot of reasons that you would want to render down your MIDI to audio. Um, I'm not saying it's a rule that you have to do, but I think it's really important to know why you may want to do that and some things that you want to look out for. So that's why I made this little video. It's a lot easier to just kind of show this stuff than to try and explain it on a Facebook thread there. So yeah, hope y'all like this video and you get something from it. And let's get started. Okay, so I created a project here, and I wanted to just show three different examples of how keeping an instrument as MIDI as opposed to rendering down to audio can give you maybe some unexpected results. So the first one here is a round robin. And for those of you that don't know what a round robin is, uh, you could kind of think of a snare drum roll thing. They call it the machine gun effect, where if you have a single snare sample and it's doing like 16th notes, uh, and with that single sample, it's going to sound like just like a machine gun. There's not going to be any variation or anything like there would be in real life. So we use a thing called round robin, which would be you'd have, maybe a dozen different snare drum samples. And every time that MIDI note hits, it's going to randomly select one of those snare drum samples to make it sound more realistic, right? So in this case, I loaded an instance of True Strike, and I just loaded up a percussion hit, right? And you can see here that round robin is on. So that means that every time you hit that MIDI note, it's triggering a different sample. It may not sound different, but it is a different sample. They're subtly different. Now, let me show you this if it's being played just as MIDI. What I did in here is I just have a whole bunch of eighth notes there. So let me just play that. Right? Sounds like it's one snare, but it doesn't sound like a machine gun. So those are round robins. Now check this out. So if you were mixing, uh, you may just keep that as MIDI and not notice the difference. But every single time you play this back, it's actually a different sample. So let me render this down. We'll go up here to render in place. And for right now, let me pull up the settings. And I'm just doing a dry render, right? So there are no effects or anything on this, no inserts. So just doing a dry render of that. And here's our audio file. Now I'm going to do a second dry render. Okay, so I've rendered the exact same MIDI file twice. Now let's zoom in here and look at these two. You can see that they are different. The audio is different in both of these. So if you're mixing with a snare drum, it may not matter, but if you're using a kick drum or something, you can see, look at how different the transients are for each of these. So these are all going to subtly affect your mix. You may not notice it, but it's there, right? Hey, if you could do me a big favor and subscribe to my YouTube channel and even like this video, that would be great. I'm trying to get my subscriber count up. So yeah, help me out if you like this. So that's the first example, is with a round robin. Let's mute this and close this. Let me show you a second example with an automated pan. So in this case, I'm using a Serum synth instance with this one patch. Hopefully you're listening with headphones. You can kind of hear that things are swishing around a little bit. It sounds the same every time you hit it. You don't notice the difference in playing, right? But let's do the exact same thing. I'm going to use a keystroke now for my render. So we render down this first one. We'll render it down again. And look at the difference there. You can just see how different your panning situation is from one to the other. And that's because this synth, we had the random phase selected. That means every time the MIDI note is triggered, it's changing where the phase is of the oscillator, and it's changing some of the panning stuff here. If you keep your eye on this pan knob when I hit it, you can see that it's every time it's triggered, it's at a different point in the pan. So that means, once again, every time you're trying to mix this, every time you play it, it's going to sound different. Let's look at the last example here. And this could be the most important. This is when you get into the bass range of things, because phase is a really important consideration when you're dealing with, not especially, but like in electronic music where you have the kick and the bass real close together and all that. You can run into phase issues if you don't have your bass oscillator always triggering the same waveform. Again, it's not a rule, it's just a thing to keep in mind. So I just kind of slapped together this real down and dirty, like psytrance type bass line. So let's listen to it. So nothing special or fancy there. Not trying to win any awards with that, but that was just to give you an idea there. Let's look at the Serum patch. Right, so we're just triggering that, and that sounds fine. And again, in a mix, when you're just listening, it may sound fine. But let's, again, render this down. Render it twice. And let's zoom way in. And so let's look at this front end of this kick here, this transients. Look at the phase relationship of these two different hits here. See, they're completely different. So what that's going to do, if you're trying to play that in relation with, what that's going to do is that can really affect your transients. So a lot of times what people will do is they'll render down a single hit, so I'm going to cut that. And like, let's say I just loved how that specific bass note happened. And then you would trigger that every time, right? And that's going to give you the exact same sound every single time that you play it. So let me just kind of show you that. Let me duplicate this stuff here a few times. Sorry, doing this on the fly. Mute the Serum, but play that. So you can hear the front end transient every single time sounds the same, as opposed to on this one here. They might sound the same, but the transient is different every single time. If you're listening in good headphones with a good room, you'll probably be able to hear that. So hopefully that helps and gives some idea of why in your situation it may be important to render down the MIDI to audio. All right, y'all. Hope you got something good out of this. See you next time. Hey everybody, thanks again for watching. I hope you learned something from that video. If you did, please like and especially subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much. And if you really love this and want to support me, come on over to my Patreon page, which is right up there. I'd love to have you. I do a lot of behind the scenes videos. I do a lot of stuff, video projection, mapping, audio, production, mixing, mastering, et cetera, et cetera. I love answering questions from people. So yeah, come on over to Patreon if you want to go deeper into this stuff with me. I'd love to have you. Okay, bye.